Hi, today I'm standing on this roof of my house here in San Jose, California, wondering whether it would be cost effective to install solar panels up here. I have a large southern facing section of roof, large enough to accommodate several solar panels, and it gets a lot of sun. But would the cost of installing a solar system really be offset by the reduction in my utility bills? So today, I'm going to show you how to build a model to explore this situation. I invite you to follow along with me. You might find it fun in a nerdy kind of way. You can incorporate your own issues into the model, and you might find there's some advantages to doing this rather than having someone else do the analysis for you. You'll know what assumptions went into the model, you have a chance to incorporate your unique circumstances, and it's easy to explore other variations and alternatives. So let's get started. So as I develop this model, I'm going to be using a software program for Windows called Analytica Free 101. Here's the download link if you're interested in installing it yourself, which you probably will be if you want to follow along or work on the model yourself. So it takes about 2 minutes to install. And let's get going.
This is what it looks like when I start the program. I can give my new model a name and describe what it will do. I'll look at my electricity consumption and how my utility bills get calculated. I've dragged this module node to the diagram as a place to flesh this out, and now I'm filling in its description. Okay. Then I'll consider how much energy the solar panels can be expected to generate. Another module to hold that, and here's the description. Once I have these submodels, this will allow me to predict how much I'll save on utility bills. I'll also want to examine the upfront installation costs of installing a solar PV system on my roof. Now, once we get those parts of the model together, I'll introduce you to some techniques for comparing the value of an upfront capital expense to a stream of savings over time. Metrics like net present value, internal rate of return, and time to recoup investment. So we'll call these metrics. Let's go into this module and start by modeling energy usage. The first rule of model building is to start simple. Don't try to include all the details at first, but instead just do something really simple and get it running, and then you can come back later and refine it. A second guideline is to start by identifying what variables you'll need to use and what their interrelationships are. So I'll do that here by dragging variable nodes to the diagram and giving them names. First, there's the amount of electricity that my household consumes. Then there's the price per kilowatt hour that the utility company charges. And from these, we'll be able to compute the energy cost. After I add in the solar panels, I'll also have the energy produced by the panels, and that will alter my net energy usage, which is what the utility company charges for. So now we draw in the arrows to show how each variable influences the other ones. So I'll adopt a convention here of doing everything in monthly units. So we'll set the units of each of these to reflect that, such as dollars per kilowatt, dollars per month, kilowatt hours per month, and so on. At this point, it's good to take a minute to fill in the descriptions of each variable to make sure that the meaning and intent of each of these is clear. A third rule of modeling is that your variables should pass the clarity test. Is the meaning of each of your variables unambiguous? Like, let's say someone told me that my energy consumption was 500 kilowatts per month. Would I know what that means exactly? Would other people interpret that differently, so that it might be ambiguous? In this case, maybe month is ambiguous. Is that February 2015? Or is it a typical monthly usage or an average? If it's an average, is it over future years, past years? How long of an average? Your description should clarify this to a point where you think it's adequate. How about the energy produced by the solar panels? Here, kilowatt hours is potentially ambiguous. It could be DC kilowatt hours or AC kilowatt hours. You see, panels are rated in DC watts, but here actually we care about AC kilowatt hours. That's after the inverter has converted the DC to AC, and that might be a little different. The point is just that you want to make sure your variables are clearly defined.
You know, I have to tell you that the trickiest part in building a model is usually identifying the variables and clarifying what they mean, the step we just did. If you do a good job at that, the rest often just falls into place easily. Now, notice that I haven't done anything mathematical or involving formulas or numbers yet. It's a very qualitative process. But now let's turn to filling in the definitions of these variables.
Net energy usage will be defined as energy consumed minus energy produced. Energy cost is just net energy usage times price per kilowatt hour. Now for the other inputs, I'll just stick some arbitrary numbers in there. So let's say 500 kilowatt hours of energy consumption per month. Let's start with 0 for the amount produced by panels, like we haven't installed them yet, and maybe 15 cents, $0.15 per kilowatt hour. Notice that all the hashing on the nodes have gone away. This means we've defined all the nodes and we can evaluate them now. So I'm going to evaluate energy cost, and we can see the result. Now I want to refine this with numbers that apply to my household. So to find the cost per kilowatt hour and the amount of electrical consumption in my household, I'm going to go to my most recent utility bill. So here it is. Right here you can see that we used 450 kilowatt hours during the month. Over here you can see that it was divided into tiers. Most of the usage went into tier 1 at 16 cents per kilowatt hour, but some was in tier 3 at 27 cents per kilowatt hour. That's a big price jump. And that cost per kilowatt hour is going to make a big difference as to whether solar panels are effective. So I'm going to need to add this tier structure into the model. First, we need to kind of understand how it works. So over here's another page from the utility bill, and here it describes it some. It says that they assign us a baseline amount that they think we might be able to live off of. Now, if we use up to that baseline, that falls into tier 1. If we pass the baseline, the next 30% of the baseline amount is charged at tier 2 pricing. The next 70% goes into tier 3, and if we exceed 200% of the baseline, the remaining usage goes into tier 4. Okay. I'll start by making a tier index. This will define the tiers. So I'll make this a list of labels index, and I'll name the labels tier 1, tier 2, tier 3, tier 4. Now let's make a variable for the tier allowance. So we'll make this a table, and we'll make that table indexed by tier. Now we can fill in the percent that can go into each tier. So 100% of the base allowance can go into tier 1. Let's make it a percent first. Okay, 30% after that can go into tier 2, 70% to tier 3, and the rest, up to infinity, can go into tier 4. Okay. We need to also add a variable for the baseline allowance, which we'll fill in a moment. And now we need the rates of each tier as well. So That will be our price per kilowatt. Let's change that to be tier rates, okay, which will encode the different rates. So make this a table indexed by tier also, and here we can put the different rates. So looking at the utility bill again, we can read the rates off. It was 16 cents, 0.16170. For tier 1, it was about 18 cents for tier 2 and 27 cents for tier 3, and we don't have any information about tier 4. So I'll Google it. Current PG&E tier rates. How about the second one there? It's an Excel spreadsheet. We'll open the spreadsheet. And residential schedules E1, that's me. So I can see 5 tiers there. Those prices are the same for tier 1, 2, and 3 that we just typed in. This has 5 tiers, but 4 and 5 are the same, so 0.33322. So going back to the model, I can enter that number, and we have our tier rates all entered. Now let me rearrange the nodes a little bit here, and I'm going to want to introduce one more variable. So we should have tier usage, where we can compute how many kilowatt hours go into each tier. So to do that, we can use the dispatch function in Analytica, which automatically dispatches to the first tier up to the capacity of each tier, which is the tier allowance times the baseline allowance. Okay, that's how many kilowatt hours each tier can hold along tiers. And before we can evaluate that, I need to find my baseline allowance. So let's go back to the utility bill again, and there's the allowance right there. It's 327 kilowatts. It looks like it's actually based on 10.9 kilowatts a day, but let's just use 327. Okay, so let's enter that baseline in there. And now we can evaluate tier usage. Before we do that, I think it would be worth putting in the units and the description here. And then let's also expand the window so that definition fits on one line. Okay, let's evaluate it. Okay, so it's dispatched to the different tiers, and let's compare that to what the utility bill had. Here's the utility bill, and the first two look okay, but tier 3 is off. See that? Right here. Why is that? Let's look at the totals. Oh, 500. There we go. We forgot to enter the actual energy consumption from the bill. Remember it was 450? Okay, so with that entered, let's look at it again. Okay, so there we go. Now the tier 3s agree. Okay, so now, get rid of the bill, and now let's change energy cost to use tier usage. So tier usage times tier rate. When we evaluate that, we can see how many dollars are in each tier. What I really want there is the sum, the total of all those. So let's sum over the tier index and evaluate, and there it is, the dollars per month, the full utility bill. On the bill, there was also this San Jose utility users tax of 5%. So let's go ahead and add that to the model as well. We'll add users tax rate in here at 5%. We'll just multiply energy cost by 1 times 5%. And so now we have the energy cost pretty close to what's on the bill there. Now I'd like to look at how producing some energy will affect this energy cost. So let's change this. In fact, let's change it to a list, and then we can look at multiple possibilities. So 0 means we don't have solar panels, and let's say we produce 50 kilowatt hours a month, or 100, or 150. So now let's reevaluate energy cost, and we can see how the energy cost actually reduces as our solar panels produce energy. So there's my utility bill going down. We can graph it and see the effect of solar panel production on my utility bills. Now I'll work on a model for how much energy will be produced. So I'm going to make an alias of this variable, and I'm going to move the original into the solar panel output module so I can work on that part of the model there. So let's jump over to that module. So we're going to be computing energy produced from the size of the solar panel system that I install. So here's a decision variable called system size. I'll make it a decision variable since I'll have to choose how much capacity to install. And I'll make it a choice control so I can easily choose between different options. Now I got to specify what options I'm choosing between. So I'm going to make it multiples of 250 DC watts from 1 to 8 panels. Now I entered those choices as an expression that gets computed rather than typing in a list of numbers, just because I find that easier to do. So you can see the choices here. I can select one, for example. Units are DC watts, and description. So how can we compute the energy produced as a function of the system size? So consider a solar panel. When the sun is shining directly on it, it may have maximum output. But now if the sun's coming in at an angle, you can see a lot of the solar energy misses the panel, so we're getting less efficiency. Then add in some weather, and even less solar light reaches the panel. To compute the actual output of a solar panel, we have to take the geometry into account, your latitude, your roof angle. We also will need to consider weather conditions and time of year. And so all this is fairly complex. Now for this, we can actually turn to NREL, the National Renewable Energy Lab, for some help. So let's go to their website, pvwatts.nrel.gov, and here we select location, San Jose. It brings in the weather information, and we can look at a system of 1 kilowatt panel and use that as a baseline, and use most of their defaults for the other stuff here. My roof points south. The azimuth is 180. I happen to know my roof is a 22-degree tilt, and so we can see what that comes up with. And here we can see the efficiencies per month, and the AC energy is really the column of interest. So now to copy the numbers into our model, I'm going to scroll down here, and there's a download link. It gets in CSV file. I'm going to open that up. It opens in Excel. Scroll down, and we want the AC system column. Let's copy those numbers. Jump back to Analytica, and now we'll have to create a variable to hold that data, and it will have to be indexed by month. So first we'll create a month index, month, and we will just make it a list of labels and type in the list of the month names. Then we'll create a variable to hold the result. Now this will be the AC kilowatts produced per DC kilowatt of panel capacity. And we'll make this a table indexed by month, and then we can just paste those values we copied into that table. I'll go ahead and fill in the units and description for this variable. It's always good to put your sources of information in there. And now let's use this to actually compute energy produced. So let's change it to an expression, and basically, since it's the kilowatt output per system size, we're going to multiply by system size, take that, but system size is in watts, so let's divide by 100, so it's per kilowatt of DC. And now we have our energy produced. It's indexed by month. We can make it a line graph. I'll just set the default to be a line graph. And there we have our graph of energy produced. So what does this mean for my utility bills? So let's go back to the utility bill module and look at the utility bill, the energy cost. And here would be my monthly bill now with the energy produced. And now it's varying by month with a lower bill in the summer. Now, the thing here is my energy consumption is assuming that we have a constant energy consumption every month. So now what I want to do is look to see if my energy consumption varies by month. To do that, I'm going to go over to the PG&E website, and I'm going to log into my account, and there is an energy usage link there, and they show me my energy usage over the past year, and the blue line is me and my actual energy usage, and so you can hover there and you can see what it is per month, and you can compare it to a typical household of the same size or to an energy efficient household. So what I want to do is I want to copy those numbers over to my model. I'm going to have to actually type them in. I don't know of a way to copy them, but what I'll do here is I'll make this vary by month. So change it to a table by month, and I'm just typing them in. So let's go ahead and graph that, and it's the same as a PG&E graph except that December is at the end. Okay, and we'll see what that does to the utility bill. Okay, so I want to compute how much that's saving me. So let's do that computation. So we'll need the energy cost, and we'll make an alias of that. I'll move that over to the savings module where we'll do this cost. I also am going to use energy produced because I want to see how much the energy costs if we're producing no energy, no solar panel, versus if we are. So with these two variables here, first we'll do the baseline, how much my utility bill is if I don't have solar panels. So that's a what if. So what is the energy cost if the energy produced by the solar panels is 0? Okay, and then we can just take the difference between the energy cost and the baseline, and that'll be the cost savings that we're getting from the solar panels. So that's just baseline cost minus energy cost, and let's evaluate that and look at our savings. So that's varying by month. You can see I'm saving the most in the summer months. And now what would that mean in terms of annual savings? So let's just create a variable called annual savings here, and I'll sum the cost savings over month to get the savings per year and evaluate that, and it says I'm going to save $210 a year with this configuration. Now I have enough of a model here to create an input-output panel. So I'm going to create an output node for annual savings and move that over to the top level. Let's get the system size, and that's an input, so let's make an input node for that. Okay, and my energy consumption is also a primary input. Let's go ahead and grab that one and make input. And let's just rearrange these a little bit so they look nice. We'll move them together. I'll hit equal equal to make them the same size. I'll hit control arrow to line them up, and I'll just space evenly, and so it looks nice. And now we have a little input output panel where I can access these things. So now I'm ready to start working on installation costs. Now installation cost is going to obviously depend on the system size, so I'm going to start by getting an alias of that and moving that over into the installation cost module where I can start working on installation costs. And obviously the more panels I get, the more the system is going to cost. So first consideration is how much does it cost per panel, or at least per DC watt panel, and we'll use that to compute the actual cost of the panels and inverters. Then there's going to be a fixed cost component that doesn't depend on how many panels we install. So that's going to be in dollars, and that might be things like the permits that are required from the city to put this in, or the cost to wire this into the breaker panel. Okay. Those will give us our total cost of the system. Then there may be some rebates and stuff, tax rebates, and if we take those off, we'll get our net cost, and connect these by arrows to kind of show how the calculation is going to proceed. And the tax credits are probably going to depend on the size of the system also. So now let's fill in the definitions of these variables, starting with the panel cost per DC watt. So to get an estimate of that, I'm going to go to the NREL site where they made an estimate for me for my area, and they say it's about $3.30 per DC watt. So I can just plug that one in there. The panel cost is just the system size times that. The system size is already in DC watts. Fixed costs, I don't know, let's say $1,000. I'm not sure. And cost of system is just those two added together. And net cost of system is going to be that cost minus any tax credits that are obtained. Now, what tax credits are available? Well, over at this website it says there is a renewable energy system credit of 30% of the cost of the system. So I'll go ahead and use that. And we can now look at the result of the net cost of the system. And let me go ahead and make that an output node on the front panel. Next, there will be a few costs that are going to depend on the size of the system. So let's move this over to the savings and compute some of these supplementary costs. So for example, I'm going to want to have my system insured once I make this investment. My homeowner's insurance will need to be increased slightly. There's maintenance costs. My value of my home will probably be increased by the city, and they'll charge me more property tax. So these additional expenses are going to affect my annual savings. So let's draw the dependencies between these. And we'll start by modifying annual savings by just subtracting off these annual expenses. The total annual expenses themselves are just these extra things added together. I'm using the expression assist here to complete the identifiers quickly. Now for property insurance, I've noticed that my property costs about 0.3% the cost of the property to insure. So I'm going to use that number. For annual maintenance, this one's kind of a hard one. I'll say $30 every year plus some factor that depends on the net price of the system, components that might need to be replaced. And for increased property taxes, my property taxes are 1.25 times the assessed value of my property. So now we can look at the result of annual savings after we've made these changes. So let's go over to the input panel and we can play with some different system sizes. So if we were to go to a 1,000 watt system, you can see it would cost me $3,000 and save me $250. If I went to a 2,000 watt system, it's cost me over $5,000. And we could select all here and see a graph of the annual savings as a function of system size. Or we could look at the net cost of the system in the same way. But now here's the thing. Let's go back and look at one system size here, like 1,000. How do we compare this? So if I invest $3,000 today and save $250 a year, is that cost effective? And that's what I'm going to look at next. So I'm going to take these nodes and throw them into the metrics. So since we're comparing cash flows over time to an initial investment, I'm going to use a time dimension. I'm going to define it as a 30-year horizon from this year up to 2044. And I'm going to create a variable where we can actually have our savings each year over time. Now, whenever we're talking about a dollar amount over time, you have to be careful about what dollar it is. So I'm going to do everything in 2015 dollars. I'm going to go ahead and put a variable called installation year. We'll use that later, but right now we're going to assume that we're installing it. Well, actually, let's make it a choice, and we can choose what our installation year will be. So I'll go to the domain for the choice and say, let's copy the values from the time index. Okay, so Now let's define this savings flow. So if we're before the installation year, then there's no savings. If it's the installation year, then we're going to have our outflow as a negative value and the savings for this year. And for years after we've installed it, we're going to have our annual savings. Okay, so if you look at the result there, go into the numbers, you can see that right now in the first year we have a big negative savings because that's our expense, and then we have a savings every year. Next, I'm going to introduce a discount rate as a way of encoding our time value of money. So this means, for example, that money this year is worth 4% more to me than it would be if I got it next year. And I want to make sure that I put this in inflation adjusted percent. So you pretend basically that you're not encoding inflation as part of your discount rate. I'm going to use 4% for the discount rate here. And now I'm ready to define net present value. Net present value is a metric that allows us to put a value on cash flows or savings over time. Basically, it just adds up all the savings over time and subtracts all the expenses, except that you discount an amount 1 year from now by the discount rate, and any amount that happens 2 years from now is discounted again, and so on. So the amounts that occur sooner count more. So essentially, after paying for the solar panel system and then collecting the savings over time, I come out $1,374 ahead. A positive net present value means that the investment is cost effective. The next metric I'm going to look at is the internal rate of return. The internal rate of return is essentially the effective compounded interest rate that I'd be receiving from this investment. The IRR function computes this amount, and here it's indicating that investing in this solar panel system is like buying a bond that pays back at 8%. The final metric I want to show you is the time to recoup cost. Before I write an expression for this, I want to show you the cumulated savings flow over time. It starts out negative because I have to pay for the system in the first year, and then my savings each year is added to the accumulated total, and eventually in 2027 I reach positive territory, meaning I've now recouped my initial investment. So I need to write an expression that finds the smallest year where this cumulated flow is positive. I'll do that using the cond_min or conditional minimum function. Find the smallest time such that the accumulation is non-negative over time. Indeed, this correctly finds 2027. Now, to get the number of years that it took, I'll subtract the installation year and add 1 so that the final year is included in the count. So now this is 13 years to recoup the cost. Now that we have those metrics, let's make some output nodes and add those to our panel at the top level. Good, now we have the output panel there. Let's go ahead and look at all system sizes and see what time to recoup cost looks like. You can see there that we never recoup the cost for 250 watt systems, and for the others it takes between 12 and 17 years to recoup the cost. Internal rate of return, we can see how it varies as the system size gets larger, approaching a little over 8%. And net present value, where it looks like the largest system size is of the best value for me. Okay, I'm done. This is the model I was looking for. But I just had another thought. The prices for photovoltaic systems have been dropping really fast in recent years. What if I put this project off for a couple more years and waited for the cost to come down even more? So let's look at that. What that would basically mean is that the panel cost per DC watt is going to decrease with time. So let's add a rate of that decrease, maybe 10%. And then let's modify the panel cost per DC watt so that it decreases by 10% each year. So if we take 1 minus that percentage and then raise that to the number of years, that will be the net decrease. Okay, so I evaluate this and we're seeing just a single number. Okay, that's because installation year is just one number right now. Let's go ahead and make an input node for installation year and move it up to the front panel so that we can keep that as one of our inputs. Shove it in there and make it the same size. And let's go ahead and set it to all. We might as well look at just one system size here, 2000. And now let's go back and we'll view our panel cost, and we can see it now decreasing by year. Now tax credits, that tax credit ended in the year 2016. So let's go ahead and say if we're going to install before 2016, then the tax credit is there. Otherwise, there's no tax credit. Now I want to add the installation year as a node to this module because it's kind of part of the whole story. So let's make an alias and put the alias in here. And that looks good. Okay, let's go back and look at some of the results now and how they vary by installation year, starting with net present value. Wow, that's getting interesting. The big drop in 2017 is clearly due to the tax credit ending, but other than that, it increases with installation year until about 2024, which means if it wasn't for that tax credit, it looks like it would be best to postpone the project until about 2024. However, given the tax credits there, it looks like postponing it for 1 year would be the optimal course of action, and it would be a good idea to do it before that tax credit ends. Next, let's look at the internal rate of return. This also looks pretty interesting. Again, I see the drop in 2017 from the tax credit ending, but then the return really skyrockets. That happens because the upfront investment cost keeps dropping, whereas the energy savings is still there. So we end up getting a ridiculously high return on a relatively small investment. My guess is that the rapid drop-off at the end is just an artifact of the model truncating the cash flow at 2044, and so that's not really real. As far as the internal rate of return for installation years in the near term, next year, before the tax credit ends, looks like a good opportunity that won't be matched again until 2021. And now let's look at time to recoup cost. Whoops! Negative numbers don't make any sense here, do they? Okay, let's find my bug. So here's the time to recoup cost. Conditional min is taken over all the time points where cumulate is non-negative. Here's the mistake. The cumulative flow is going to be 0 for all years prior to the installation year. So we need to add the condition that it look only at time points after the installation year. Let's try that. And now those look reasonable. So this is showing that right now it'll take 12 or 11 years next year to recoup the investment, but if I wait till after the tax credit ends, it'll take 16 years to recoup that investment.
Okay, that's good enough for now. So, the next step for me is going to be to go out and find various options, parts, contractors, and so on. But at least now I feel like I understand the trade-offs that I need to deal with, and when I find particular options, I can plug the parameters into the model to really understand whether they're cost-effective options. You might be able to use this model too. You might be able to modify it for your own particular situations. But more importantly is I hope that you learn something about building models of your own. You might be able to use the same principles I demonstrated here and apply them to other problems that you face. So, thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed. I'll see you later. Bye.